On June the 15th, I was in Egypt taking part in the Global March for Gaza. The events that unfolded that day were quite chaotic, and people may have seen video that came out from that night of activists being attacked, such as this video.
بيعتقلوا المتضامنين مع غزة بلطجية.
The way Zionists chose to interpret this was that this was a case of angry locals attacking activists because those angry locals disagree with the politics of the activists. And we can see here some particularly egregious examples of a Zionist framing of it.
A convoy of anti-Israel activists have been detained and deported from Egypt while attempting to march into Gaza on foot. The locals were not too happy about their presence. Check this out. The activists were shocked that Egypt didn't want them there, but since October 7, Egypt has refused to take in refugees from Gaza, and now they seem to be taking a harder line against pro-Palestinian activists than we do in the West. What do they know that we don't?
Well, they clearly know a great deal because...
That jazz, I need to share with you just a little story about anti-Israel lefties getting a very big mugging by reality. By now, of course, everybody is well familiar with climate crusader Greta Thunberg and her attempt to sail to Gaza to, quote-unquote, block the blockade. Well, Israel responded to this effort with a hearty, "How dare you?" and kicked her out of the country, sending her home in that back row of the plane, in that back row that doesn't recline, stuck next to the galley and the toot. Hope you had a nice flight, Greta, and well done, Israel. 10-10 no notes, as the kids say. But oddly, this cautionary tale hasn't stopped others from trying their hand at a little terrorism of themselves. Meet the geniuses behind something called the Global March to Gaza. Yes, that's right, you heard correctly, who have decided that it would be a real swell idea and a high old time to fly to Egypt and from there try to march into the Gaza Strip on foot to open up the territory to humanitarian relief. Here you see some of their supporters cheering those heading off from Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. And boy, that guy in the blue shirt, look at him there on the right, he really looks like he'd be a lot of fun at parties. But, of course, these guys forget that not long after the October 7th attacks, Egypt sealed its border with Gaza. Why? Well, because they didn't want to wind up like Lebanon did in 1970, or later than that, or Jordan in 1970, or anywhere else. The Palestinians and the PLO went to spread their special sunshine across the Middle East. So how do you think the Egyptians reacted to these silly white Western liberals presuming to undo their own blockade of Gaza? About as well as you would expect. Yes, that's right. Everyday Egyptians decided that they would beat the ever-loving you-know-what out of these activists with belts and shoes and whatever else they had to hand.
So this is the wisdom spread by Sky News Australia. And it's fair enough to say that basically everything said in both of those videos is a complete lie. The composition of the march participants wasn't quite as white as they would have you believe, for example. So most people there were from Europe, but a lot of them were not Caucasian. You know, there are a lot of them of Arab descent or of other ethnicities. But also, I think what they're forgetting is that this was a group that were working in conjunction with and intending to combine with the Sumud convoy that came from Tunisia originally and was also trying to join with us to do this movement towards the Rafah border. That is among the many lies, which I will get to later. But one of the things is the angry locals. So we were actually stopped. Where this happened was where I was earlier in the day, and where we were stopped was in the middle of the desert, as you can see from this satellite photo. So who exactly were these so-called angry locals? Because there were no actual locals to come and do this. And also, what exactly sort of world do these people live in that they think Egyptians feel the same as they do in their racist, sociopathic hatred of Palestinians? I mean, we saw that one of the commentators there forgot that you're supposed to only say it's about Hamas, and made a sarcastic comment about the sunshine that Palestinians bring to places. They make it clear in both of those videos that they think that Egyptians hate Palestinians, and that is because they know what Palestinians are like. So the fundamental racism of the discourse is coming out in this. But one of the things that I think we need to understand is that it's very important to... Hang on a sec, I just have to pause. So one of the clearly important things is for Israelis to believe that Egyptians are on their side. It helps them normalize their own feelings of antagonism towards Palestinians. So it's both a politically and psychologically important thing. So the first peace agreement between Israel and an Arab country was with Egypt. The Camp David Accords saw a peace treaty signed between the two countries. I think since that time they have built up a sense of Egypt being in their camp. So there was a film called The Band's Visit, for example, which I think is quite a profound liberal Zionist text. You know, it wouldn't seem it at first unless you kind of dive into what the subtext is for Israelis. And it's about this hapless police band of Egyptians who go to play in an Arab town in Israel, and are accidentally sent to a Jewish town in the Negev desert. But the locals, although they're suspicious at first, they decide to be nice to them. And can't we all just get along? You know, sort of thing. So it's almost like they're magnanimously forgiving the Egyptians for the past, which, if you actually know the history, is maybe a little bit galling. The Egyptians lost more than any other country in the 1948 war, and then, of course, in 1956, Israel invaded Egypt. So, when someone I know had to explain to an Israeli that they were going to Egypt and reveal to them that they were a pro-Palestine activist, which the Israeli had not known up until then, that the Israeli was like, well, you go there, we love Egypt. Egypt, we travel to Egypt. We have no problem with Egypt. You'll see, sort of thing, because, they are welcomed in Egypt, but in a way it's a giant Potemkin village for them, because pro-Palestine sentiment is repressed in Egypt. So one of the incidents that happened when we were in Cairo, in old Cairo, we went to a hotel, and the first night there we had no bottled water in the fridge, and that's pretty peculiar. You need, it's ubiquitous bottled water. We didn't need it, we had filter bottles anyway. So, but it was unusual. And then halfway through the next day, we get a knock on the door, and there's someone from housekeeping with this massive grin on her face, and she hands us these bottles of water, and the water is a pretty common brand in Egypt, it turns out, O brand, and it looks like this. Now, the writing on that map of, mandatory Palestine is Arabic saying Palestine. So that is an indication of the sort of sentiment that is really bubbling beneath the surface. The reality is that since October the 7th, 2023, there have been 181 people detained indefinitely under a rolling detention. So they're detained without charge, and it keeps being rolled over for pro-Palestine activism. And while I was in Egypt, I spotted only one piece of graffiti with a Palestine flag. That's it. And it was, and the week we were there, apparently, several young men were sentenced to 2 and 3 year sentences in prison for doing pro-Palestine graffiti. Now, we'd been told that there were no, it was illegal to protest in Egypt, so we weren't expecting to see any protests. But as it happened, we were going to meet someone at a restaurant like the night after we arrived, and we drove past a pro-Palestine protest, and I was like, oh wow, this is maybe not as underground as we thought. And so I mentioned it to an Egyptian we'd met, and he said, oh no, that's the syndicate of journalists. They're the only people in the country who are allowed to do this. And sure enough, once a week, this group, and it's probably 80 to 100, they gather on the steps of their building. We went past it later so you could see, and they're just on these steps, big steps, but like a very constrained area, doing this demonstration facing out into like traffic, basically. So the cops were there. The cops are everywhere, with their big trucks ready to take away people by the hundreds. Apparently, like, they often swoop in, grab 1 or 2 people for being too enthusiastic or whatever, and take them away. But this happens about once a week, when we just happen to pass at exactly the right time to see that. So the desire is there. Another thing I'd say is, like, during June the 15th, during the events of that day, we had a long-suffering taxi driver who thought he was just getting a fare to, admittedly, a 2-hour-long drive, but he did not sign up to be stuck in the desert for many hours. And we had, of course, concealed our purposes from him. And when he found out, he did not, it didn't make him angry or disturb him at all. He was very supportive and looked after us amazingly well. And wouldn't leave us, even though we were promising, offering to, we're saying, we'll pay you, just go back to Cairo. He wouldn't leave us. He was very concerned for us, which is pretty typical of Egyptians, I would say. So if he had been like as anti-Palestinian as the Egyptians, local Egyptians, supposedly were, he could have made our lives absolute misery with little effort. Instead, he ran around trying to find us water, toilet, and so forth. So, going back to the lies that were told about this march was planned as a strictly non-violent legal action. There was never any intention to try and enter Gaza. That would be absolutely ridiculous. It was meant to be a symbolic act to draw attention. So I think the main thing for me would be less the march than the rally near the border at Rafah. Rafah is there's Egyptian Rafah and there's Palestinian Rafah. So we'd be at Rafah, but not necessarily right at the border, which would be pretty dangerous, of course. But the point is that we'd be rallying there, we'd be communicating with the outside world, we'd be showing them, giving them that sense of proximity. And my experience is that, like, simply having said to people, I went to Egypt, suddenly they take you a lot more seriously than they do when you're, doing the same thing back at home. They probably shouldn't. They probably should listen to you anywhere because the issues don't change, but the reality is differently. It makes them think you're putting something on the line, which really I wasn't personally. I was in a very privileged position to be able to go across the world, and I had quite a good time, as it happens, which is not why I went. So we all signed a form to register where we said we would break no Egyptian laws. So that means that we weren't there to demonstrate. We weren't there to do any sort of public demonstration because that's illegal. We wanted to do something that was kind of out of the eyes of the Egyptian people because we're not there to disturb the Egyptian government or its policies. Now, the march tried to get permission in advance. They were trying for some time before they decided that the urgency of the situation meant that they needed to make a date and keep negotiating, but have people there. And maybe once people were there would be more pressure on the government to allow us to do this. There is a precedent for this in that in 2010 under Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian government decided to allow a convoy into Gaza itself. And that was partly because they waited in one place for a long time, generating a bit of publicity in the Arabic media. So we were warned not to, it was meant to, the whole process was meant to take 2 days marching, 2 days rallying, so 4 days roughly. And we were warned to prepare for an extra week in case we were like in Cairo hoping to generate that sort of thing or doing something similar. So my personal expectation was that we probably weren't, I probably wasn't going to be marching. I thought that the scenario would likely be, if anyone marched, it would be a token number. So the thing is with going to where we want to march, it's in the Sinai, it's on the north coast of the Sinai. We would go to a town called Al Arish and walk 45 kilometers to Rafah. Now, that is a closed zone. You cannot get there without the Egyptian government letting you. So in order to get there, you have to go across the Suez Canal or under it through a tunnel, which was where we were going to go. There's a military checkpoint. If you don't have permission, you're not getting through. So we never, ever intended to do something that the Egyptian government didn't want to let us do. So that was the whole time, that was the plan. My expectation was that I probably wouldn't be marching, but for me, the thing was to be there with people, like making videos, writing, and so forth, generating a sense of immediacy. And if you think about thousands of people from 80 countries all communicating back to those countries about this, this would generate a great deal of attention onto the issue that wouldn't otherwise be there. Again, perhaps wrongly, because we're all prepared to do this sort of thing all the time. We're out there, we're rallying, we do things all the time, but you know, people are going to pay more attention if you're traveling to somewhere exotic and reporting back to them and saying this is what's happening here. And certainly, you know, as it happened, we, as you'll see, we kind of got to do a bit of this, and it did generate some sort of excitement. So the organisational structure, though, had to because we knew that the Egyptian government was antagonistic to our ends, which I'll return to soon, even though we had no intention of doing anything to disrupt their politics. They're still antagonistic, which is quite interesting. But so the organisers had to kind of run a cell structure. Each group of 50 had a representative, and there was sort of information and plans were supposed to pass down through that, but be as restricted as possible. So we were a bit in the dark. We were with a contingent of just over 20 from Aotearoa. So we were probably at the bottom of the heap in terms of, and so, you know, we weren't necessarily forewarned of everything. And I can't see how they could have done it otherwise. I don't think this is a particular failing of organisation. I think it's simply the reality. You can't have, even if you've got the best, securest encrypted communications, you can't really spread that information amongst 4,000 people without it getting to the authorities through the various spies in the movement, which are definitely there. You've got to believe that too. So the original plan was to get on a bus at 8 a.m. From Old Cairo and go into go to a place called Ismailia near the Suez Tunnel, and there we would gather, right? And there, presumably, hopefully, there would be publicity generated and perhaps some sort of pressure on the Egyptian government to let us through. So we were to wait for instructions to come through on Telegram, and they were supposed they pushed back the time till noon for the rendezvous. Then we were supposed to wait for further instructions, which were going to come at 10 a.m. They were delayed. we reached the hotel. We were going to meet with the other Kiwis just after 11, I think. And still nothing had come through. And we're sitting outside there, and then a couple of plainclothes police come over to us. And they were fine, but the creepy thing about it was we're sitting on this bench and there were like Egyptians around us, and they just went, go to them, and they just scuttled off with not a word, not asking, not daring to ask why they were asked to leave or anything like that. They just knew, go, and that was it. So, I mean, that was just a little taster of, the hidden side of the Egypt security state. Because, I mean, there are cops and barriers everywhere. So, I mean, it's not that hidden really, but that was, another side to it. So we had, because we'd been told that there could be a delay, we'd booked a hotel for that night and the night after. So when they asked what we were doing, we said we're just shifting hotel, and showed, had a notebook or where to go. We were in the wrong place for that hotel, but they kind of accepted that story, and then we just got up and wandered off and went in completely the wrong direction, which didn't seem to bother them. But that was the only reason we went in the wrong direction, was because we were actually lost. So we thought we were heading towards our hotel, but we failed. So we start wandering off, and then desperately messaging, because there were a lot more police around than just the two. So we were telling people, don't come to that hotel, and we started wandering, and eventually a message came through, like it was 20 past 11 by the stage or something like that. It was like, everyone just get a taxi to Ismailia. That's a 2-hour drive away, and it was on a Friday. Friday is not the best day in an Islamic country for 4,000 people to suddenly want to get 2-hour taxi drives. Put it that way. So I was kind of like, I didn't know. I thought, well, either go early or you go late, because you're not going to, if you wait for half an hour, there's no way you're getting a taxi. So I kind of thought, well, why don't we check into our hotel, and then we'll see if the coast is clear, and then go in a few hours, maybe relax a bit first and then go. So we're trying to get to our hotel, and we wander around kind of back more in the direction we're supposed to go to. We come to Tahrir Square, still not really quite going in the right direction, but sort of. And we're stopped there. The whole square is blocked off. There are cops everywhere, right? And they asked where we were going. A policeman with very good English asked us where we're going. And so we say, and he said, well, sorry, you can't go through here. There's, it's all blocked off for the day or whatever. And they offered to find us how to get there. But we said, no, we know. And I pointed at my thing, and still wasn't really going in the right direction. But anyway, they finished, so they left us alone. And then this woman with a backpack does a stage whisper, like, march to Gaza. Like, the cop right there. But anyway, he didn't pick up on that. And this woman, who turned out to be Swiss Algerian, had just arrived in the country, and she was kind of, she'd got the message, but she was lost, and she was by herself. She didn't have anyone else to go with, and so forth. And it's not that cheap to pay someone to drive, because you've got to drive 2 hours in a taxi by yourself. So she joined up with us, and we decided to get a taxi. So we did that, and drove for an hour, no problem. And then about 30 kilometers from Ismailia, on the Ismailia Desert Road, they started stopping people. And just before we got there, they'd started, and some people had arrived there, and they weren't at that stage taking passports. And I want to just share this little video of some English people really leaning with. This is recorded by Crispin Flintoff, who has a great YouTube channel, and English people leaning into their national strength and being complaining tourists.
Right, so look, we're here. There's quite a few different nationalities, groups here. Can't get through. Some have had their passport taken, some haven't yet done that. They're not sure what to do. You're a tourist, obviously, going to look at the seafood, here to have the seafood and the mango that's so good.
Absolutely. So there's a great museum in Ismailia as well that I wanted to go and see. We just want to go there, chill out, but it's a nightmare, as you can see around us. There's just cars everywhere. So
I mean, they're letting Egyptians through on their car, but they're not letting anyone who's not Egyptian. I mean, what do you think about that? You're a tourist going for fish and mango, aren't you?
look, it's not our first time here, is it?
No,
We've been before.
I mean,
so.
obviously, Egyptian authority have a reason, so we respect that. But you know, we come in peacefully here to go and enjoy ourselves, so we don't know what's going on.
What do you guys say about the...
Well, I've come to sightsee. It's my first time here, and I want to see Egypt, and I'm not being allowed to do that, which it's very oppressive.
Anyway, so we arrived there, and I didn't, there was I didn't even notice Crispin Flintoff there. There was probably only 150 people there at the time. I'm just guessing, really, but it seemed about that sort of number. And they took our passports straight away. So they were in the passport taking phase. So basically the car pulls up, someone comes to the thing, takes away all our passports and wanders off. And our driver just went and parked. I can't imagine what the parking and walking must have been like later on, but it wasn't too far for us. We walked back and we're told we'll get our passports back in an hour. So we're there. They're stopping everyone on this highway. The traffic is backed up a very long way. And it's hot. I mean, it would reach 38 degrees there, we just mainly stuck to the shade, but a lot of people were out in there, and the numbers kept growing and growing until, I think there were over 1,000 people at our checkpoint. I would, again, I'm only guessing, I would say around 2,000. At some point, they must have realised there were a lot more people than they thought there were going to be. So they bring in other checkpoints before reaching that one. So other checkpoints, people were also stopped in smaller numbers, so they were in smaller groups. Now, for a while, we just milled around doing nothing. We're all tourists, and then people started chanting "passports back, passports back," then they started chanting "Free, free Palestine." So that sort of, the mask was off at that point. The numbers still kept building, but, we basically, you had thousands of people there. Suddenly in a demo that was really a very disruptive, large demo, organised effectively by the Egyptian authorities. And honestly, I think, Extinction Rebellion would have to take their hat off to them, because they basically made a busy highway all, go past this massive demo. So there was a lot of public visibility to these Egyptians of a pro-Palestine rally, which I think was the thing that we promised we wouldn't go there and do, but that's what happened, and it was quite effective, I think. So we had Nelson Mandela's grandson, who's a chieftain. It was there. Zwelithini Mandela, I think his name is, if I pronounce that even remotely correctly. And he was one of the organisers. And so at one point, the Swiss woman, who's French-speaking, obviously, well, not obviously, but from Geneva, French-speaking Swiss woman, came over and said that Dr. such and such is speaking. Now, I hadn't heard of this person, and I don't know if she was an organiser or if she had some status anyway, but I think it was the same person who later spoke in English, and she basically said she was trying to persuade people to leave where they were waving flags and chanting and so forth, and go to a piece of lawn that was a piece of grass, an area of grass, sorry, not a piece, an area of grass where people were sticking to their original pledge not to do anything to disrupt the Egyptian government. And the idea, she said, was to demonstrate to the authorities that we were there, we were sticking to our word, we had no intention of doing anything that would be harmful to them. Now, this area of grass would be where the videos come out of people being assaulted later. Basically, word spread that they would hand passports back, but people would have to turn around and go back to Cairo. Our first instinct was, no, well, if we stay in greater numbers, that's more pressure. And so, our driver was extremely, couldn't get his head around the idea that we were just going to stay. So he just kept, saying, no, you have to go back. And so we, the whole process was insane because, they had this office with barred windows, and there were just piles and piles of passports there. And they were just ended up just handing over, a stack of a particular country, and then someone would go and stand in the middle of all this chaos and yell out names, and while people are chanting, and it was just so full on, but it was, it wasn't unpleasant, let's put it that way. It was, I think, I heard of one person having a meltdown there, and I can understand that, but everyone mostly seemed to be having a pretty good time of it. So we, this is the process, and by the time we actually got our passports, it had become obvious that there was no going forward. One of the things is that we had been told you don't need food or water. We had these filtered bottles, so we were all right for water, sort of, in that you could get water from a tap, but it was really hot, so you could stop yourself from dying, but it was not the most pleasant thing to drink, and not really sure how good it would be for the filter in the long run to be running basically hot water through it. So we had no food, and we weren't really prepared to camp out because we'd been told we'd be marching and the food and water would be provided by the organisers while we marched. And so we weren't really prepared, and we kind of thought, no, well, we'd better just go back. And that's what we did. Now, I think some of the people who, particularly the Francophone people, they got more information than us because some of them clearly were prepared, and I think that they might have been the ones who were perhaps, had kind of already made a commitment to doing this sort of peaceful gathering, which I imagine was the plan in Ismailia anyway, that we would just camp out quietly, that's we left basically, and we thought, well, we'll see what happens. Our driver offered to take us at 5 o'clock in the morning to Ismailia and so forth, but it was pretty clear that that wasn't going to work because the people had been scattered. They were in Cairo. They were going and grabbing people in hotels and from cafes and stuff like that, and they'd take them and they'd treat them rather roughly and then deport them. So then there's this attack.
Shame on you! Shame on you! بلطجية بيجروا الناس بيضربوا الناس بلطجية بلطجية بيعتقلوا المتضامنين مع غزة بلطجية.
Now, what is happening here? As I said, there's no locals around, so why were these people there? In the places where there are fewer people, the cops would just rough people up and put them on buses. What you can see here is a larger number of people. I don't know how many, but we're talking hundreds anyway. They're sitting using passive resistance. There's not a lot of banner waving there. There's I can see a couple of banners. The cops let them be attacked for a little while, and then they, I've seen in a video, they stepped in and got rid of the thugs who were attacking them. So I think the numbers were too high for them to just use the police to get rid of them, because then they can't stop people live streaming what's happening. It would have been very quite a full-on image of police forces attacking protesters. And so it was a better story for them to bring these people in who are apparently affiliated to a gang, well, a part of a gang that's affiliated to the government, to attack them and then spin the whole thing that this is just local Egyptian rage at what people trying to express their opinion about a genocide. I mean, when you actually try and deconstruct what they're saying, then it makes no sense, and they live in a very, very twisted world when they say that the Egyptians just got angry at people who are sitting offensively. Anyway, so you have to ask why it was so important for the Egyptian authorities to stop us. The whole point of the way we did things was to have as little impact on Egyptian politics as possible. So this isn't about Egyptian politics. Now, those people who say that this was a meaningless symbolic act, I mean, if that was the case, then why would anyone stop us anyway? It makes no sense. I think a clue is maybe in the Israelis putting out a very strong statement to Egypt, demanding that their government stop the jihadis of the Sumud, they called them jihadis of the Sumud convoy, from going to the border of Rafah. I mean, that's the thing. They can't have, they won't allow the Freedom Flotilla in with a small modicum of aid. It's because these symbolic acts threaten to break a sense of they threaten to break a narrative. So I think it actually shows a certain fragility that will, in the long run, it will break. History isn't just immensely mutable. We have an historical record on our side, on the pro-Palestinian side, that is not going anywhere. It doesn't matter how long this lasts, of course it matters in the human sense, but it won't change the way history views things, even if they manage to cleanse the entirety of Mandate Palestine of all Palestinians, which I don't see that they can. Even if they did that, the historical record is not going to cover up the level of violence of this genocide. We've just had an estimation of the population of Gaza from Harvard Dataverse that talks about the estimated population being 1.85 million. That's a drop of nearly 400,000. Now, over 100,000 left, but there have been births in that time as well. So roughly we're talking about perhaps 15 to 20% of the population have probably been killed, either directly or they've died of deprivation caused by the genocide. Those facts aren't going anywhere. No one is ever going to forget that. They seem determined to... I don't want to make... I'm not making this comparison because of some sense of trying to make a moral equivalence. But Hitler, when he embarked on a massive plan of genocide in Eastern Europe, he took as inspiration the cleansing of Native Americans in North America. But he was mistaken to think that he was living in that same historical moment. And so are the Israelis. This isn't going anywhere. And this is why they need to repress so much, why they need to control the narrative so much. Because the reality is that people hate the genocide. What they're doing is simply keeping them confused, keeping them from acting, keeping them passive, and keeping them scared in the case of Egyptians. So, that's what I want to say is, if it was all so pointless and such a failure, why did the Egyptian authorities spend so much effort and create such chaos and disruption to stop us from doing this thing? Thank you.